Well, again, thank you for coming to our Monday service. I don't know about you, but over the years, I've had a few arguments with God about timing, I'm never quite, it seems, on the same page with him. I always want him to act sooner than he does, Eventually he shows up, but I wish he would just do it sooner. It would save me a lot of anxiety, it would save me a lot of grief if we just get his timing down, But there's one area of timing when it comes to God where you're just convinced he knows what he's doing. And you look through history and you realize God's timing is probably best, even if it seems to us that it is not best. And that is certainly true of the events we talk about this week, this Holy Week. This is the week of Passover, the week of Easter. As Jesus came to this earth, you could see the way his life was planned. It's no coincidence that it's at this particular week that he enters Jerusalem. It is the week of Passover. Right now, our Jewish brothers and sisters who celebrate that feast, they're celebrating it this week as well. In that time, it was one of those festivals that you had to go to Jerusalem. If you were at all able, you had to make the trip to Jerusalem and participate in that festival. And God designed it so that Jesus enters Jerusalem right at that moment. It is that festival that commemorates events from more than 1,000 years before. It goes way back to the time of the children of Israel in captivity for hundreds of years. And God finally decided to show up. I'm sure in their mind, they were waiting too. They were not on the same page with God in terms of timing. But God finally decided to show up in what we call the fullness of time, when he was ready. And if you remember how the story goes, there was a series of plagues upon what was then the dictator, the representative of Satan, if you will, the enemy, the one who was claiming to be God. And there were 10 plagues, all of which were designed to show that God was truly God against some of the gods there in Egypt. And that last plague was the most devastating. It was the death of the firstborn children. Just a terrible thing for us to get our minds around, that firstborn child was just going to be taken, which is just so against our modern sensibilities. But the firstborn son, especially in that day, he was the heir to the kingdom. He was the heir to the family. He was the one who would get all the wealth, who would get all the property, who would get the throne. And God was making a point to this Pharaoh: who is the real king? Who is the real God? Who is the real people of God? And all these victims were a part of that because of one person who refused to bow to the God who is God. So many people suffered. And really, there was no difference between those people that died in Egypt that day and the Israelite people. They were all sinners. They all fell short. They all told lies. They all did horrible things. There was no real distinction in terms of quality of their morality. But God was making a larger point. He instituted a festival. It was very uniquely crafted. The whole thing was to show this people that he was about to deliver them from their captivity. But in order for that to happen, there had to be a sacrifice. There were all these other folks being sacrificed. God took this one sacrifice. He said it would be a lamb for each household, a year old, one of the firstborn, right? It was just recently born. Take one of those. And that lamb would have to be sacrificed for the family. The judgment that would normally be poured out upon the sinful world, it was poured out on this poor, innocent victim. And the blood from that victim was placed upon the doorways of God's people, and God looked at that blood and bypassed those people, and out of an act of sheer mercy, for no other reason, out of sheer mercy, he let that people live. They continued to be his family. And God commanded them that they would have to remember this act of mercy for the rest of their time as his people. And then he gave them another symbol. It was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They had to bake bread, but see, the time of their salvation was now. So they had to rush the cook job on the lamb. Eat it right away. The bread, no leaven, no time for it to rise, no time for the loaves to just eat it and get going, because today is the day of your salvation. It's that reminder to them throughout centuries that today is the day of your salvation. Today I'm going to act. You've been waiting for all that time for me to act, and I'm telling you, today is the day of your salvation. Eat and move, because you are free and saved today. That's the festival that they were remembering in that Holy Week. That's the festival that we're remembering. But Jesus does something unique. As his disciples are making their way towards Jerusalem, they prepare to celebrate this festival, this remembrance of God's act of mercy, this remembrance of his day of salvation. And he pulls his disciples together in a room that's prearranged, and he gives this whole meal a new understanding. Interpreters are not all agreed on whether it was the Passover meal itself or it was the evening before the Passover. It really doesn't matter, because it is about the Passover. And what he does is he takes this image of the Paschal lamb and the bread, and he transforms it for us to understand how it applies not just to that people in that time, but to us in our time. We call that the Last Supper. It's what we're going to celebrate tonight as part of Maundy Thursday. We see a record of that in the book of Matthew, a very brief record. Matthew chapter 26. We're asking these deep questions for our season, and to me the deep question today is, what has Christ given us? I mean, what has he really given us? And I think he answers that question in this Last Supper. Verse 26, we read, "While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, 'Take and eat, this is my body.'" Notice what he does here. He takes the body of the Paschal lamb and he associates it with bread, because what we're going to find out is that Jesus is the Paschal lamb. He will be sacrificed, and we don't need to sacrifice over and over again. Jesus' sacrifice, that sacrifice is done. That's why we're not sacrificing lambs as we continue the Last Supper. Jesus is that sacrifice. But notice how he joins that sacrifice to bread, so that as we can continue to remember the meaning, but in bread. But why bread? Of all things. Now, we had unleavened bread. It's that reminder that today is the day of salvation. But bread is one of those things you have to eat every day. At least in that culture, that was the staple, right? You had to eat bread every day. It's kind of like cultures now. It's like rice in some cultures. You have to eat every day. Or if you're from Iowa, it's corn, right? Or if you're like us, it's caffeine. We have to have caffeine. It's what we do. It's how we sustain, right? It's what you must do every day to eat. It's what you must survive on. And what Jesus is saying is, I'm giving you something here. That unleavened bread, it was just bread, but I'm giving you my broken body to be your bread for the rest of your life. And not just for this life, but for all eternity. Something for you to live on, day in and day out. See, that broken body of his, that was the Paschal lamb sacrificed. He broke his body for us. And we are broken people. Not just our bodies. No one has to tell us that. We're getting older, right? We know our bodies are breaking. We get that. But it's not just our bodies. It's our life. It's our society. It's our culture. It's our family. It's just broken. And we give up and we give in and we think it's lifeless and we think it's dead and we think there's no life left in it. How will we keep going? And Jesus puts that broken body on a cross and dies in our place and says, I will take all the blame and all the guilt for that. I will take it all. All the failure that you own, even though that you don't own. The world owns. Stuff you never even did. The victims, he will be the victim for us. He will own it all so that we don't have to own it anymore. We can let him carry that guilt and that failure and that shortcoming and all that stuff that we feel so bad about not living up to. He owns it all. And then he says, I'm going to give you that body as your life. I will give you this sustenance, this bread, and it's something you eat. See, those symbols, that unleavened bread, it's just symbols, but he's saying, I will give you life every day. It's spiritual bread. It's bread of his word, of his truth, of his spirit inside us every day. Even in our broken bodies, even in our broken families, even in our broken relationships, even in our broken churches, even in our broken culture, he continues to feed us with his truth, with his word, with his spirit. He said, I will sustain you. That's what he gives us in this bread of his body on the cross, sacrificed so that we don't have to live in death. We live a new life because of what he gives us. But then he gives us another valuable symbol. You remember that blood of the lamb that has to be placed on the doorway. Now, just like he joined the body of the sacrifice to the bread, he's now going to join that blood to the cup of wine. Notice what he says in verse 27. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. In that culture, blood is life. The blood is your life. I mean, now we kind of think of breath, and we kind of monitor breath, and when the breath stops, we say, or the heart rate, when that stops, you're dead. But in that culture, it's about the blood that runs red, that is the sign of your life. If there's blood pumping, that is the sign of your life. When that sacrifice is laid on the altar, that blood runs out, it means that life is sacrificed. And what God did that day with that lamb, which seemed very strange, not necessarily strange for that culture, but strange for us, that he would take the death of an animal and the blood of an animal in place of our guilt. Little did we know at the time that God was looking ahead to the death of another sacrifice, the death of his firstborn, who is also a victim of the judgment, if you will. The death of his firstborn, who poured out his blood. And so when God looked upon that symbol of the blood on the doorposts, out of sheer mercy, he says, you're still my family. You're still my family. Why? What did they do? What did they do that was any different than the other camp did? Nothing. Other than Jesus saying, looking forward to Jesus, that blood on there, that somebody had died for them. In this case, a Paschal lamb, looking forward to the day that Jesus died for us. He's drawing that analogy for us, that we are his children. We are his family. Paul tells us that he is the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Jesus is that firstborn, and we are his brothers and sisters, all of us. We are part of God's family. He is our Father. He is our God. Not because we're anything great, not because we did anything different than anybody over there. It's just because out of sheer mercy, this Lamb of God laid himself on an altar, and his blood was poured out on that cross like the frames of the door. And God said, out of mercy, I forgive your sins, and you are part of my family. And he gives that cup of wine to us as a reminder of that forgiveness and that life. And again, it's not just a symbol. See that blood on the doorpost, that's just a symbol, but he's saying this wine, this red liquid, that's my life being poured into you. Just like the bread goes into you, this is my life being poured into you. The righteous love of God, the righteous life of God being poured into us, making us new whole people, making us the children of God, making us different than they are, helping us to think differently and feel differently and act differently and be the very people we are created to be. That's the promise there in that blood that he asked you. And I know it's a horrible symbol if we think about it, to drink someone's blood. I mean, that's just, who does that? Early Christians were criticized for this ritual because even then it didn't sound right. But if you understand what is involved here, what he's really saying is, I want to give you my life. That blood poured out, his life poured out for forgiveness of sins, but then I want to fill you with my righteousness, my wholeness, my goodness. I want to make you who you were always intended to be, my children made in my image. That's what he gives us in that cup. But there's one more symbol to all of that. That very word, Maundy, Thursday, it comes from the same word that we get the English word mandate. It's about a command. It's called Maundy Thursday because it's the night on which God gives a new command. Christ gives a new command to his disciples. My new command I give to you, that you love one another. That's where this all comes from. And the point he's making here is that this supper, we do it together. It's a community thing. It's not like we just drove through McDonald's and got it, you know. You'll notice when I do this in our church, I always pause and ask, does everybody have everything they want? Everybody have? Because we do this together as a community. We have authorized the deacons to take it to the sick, those that are in hospital or senior homes that they can't participate. We have authorized the deacons. We gave them a kind of a formula to use. They can go and do that. So if you know somebody that's not able to participate, our deacons are empowered to do that. But as a general rule, we like to do it as a family because that's what Christ did. It's about being together and about loving one another. That's the whole point. And we see that effectively in this last little phrase that Jesus gives us in verse 27 or 29. Jesus says, I tell you that I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. There's always a theme running throughout the Old Testament prophets. We see it here in Jesus. We see it throughout the New Testament, this idea that someday this is all about a festival, a marriage feast of the Lamb, call it whatever you will. Someday this Passover meal, it's going to all be together and we will all be in a meal. We will all sit down together. It's the fulfillment of the kingdom when the king sits down with his whole family. And Jesus says, I'm going to wait for that day. Some of you, you've had that when you have your Christmas family dinner or your Thanksgiving. You're waiting, and you got that one uncle or aunt that doesn't come till like 3 hours after you tell them to be there and you're like, there's anxiety because you can't wait, or you can't wait till your kids get back. You're just waiting. That's the image here that Jesus is giving us. I'm just there waiting till my whole family gets there. We start off talking about time and how God is like taking his time. And then you realize maybe one of the reasons he's taking his time because the whole family isn't there yet. There's family out there in the world that don't know their family. They're still living under the judgment. They don't know that there's a lamb. They don't know that there's a sacrifice. They don't know that there's life available to them. And so the people of God, Jesus is saying, you are now my witnesses. Because I want to throw a party, and not everybody knows that yet. So what's the point? We start off with that deep question. What has Christ given us? I want to say, in this supper, he's given us everything we need to be who he always wanted us to be. In this supper, he gives us everything we need to be what he always wanted us to be. That's his children. All the blessings, all the promises, all the forgiveness, all the possibilities, it's all there, represented in the bread and the cup. To be his children, reflecting him in this world, that's what he's given us in himself, symbolized in this bread and this cup. And so where do we go from here? That's an easy one. We receive the bread and the cup. We take the gift that he gives us. And we pray that he works through that presence of his with us. To be that spiritual presence, to change how we think, how we feel, how we act, so that all the family can be there at the dinner.